I'm the CEO of the Mathematical Association of Victoria. Welcome to Melbourne Museum this Sunday morning. Before we start the lecture, I just ought to let you know that this lecture has had a slightly longer process of development than some of them. You might remember that 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, I reported to the audience that the Herald Sun was interested in this particular lecture. Somebody thinking perhaps that what the Mathematical Association of Victoria will be doing on the 16th of September is telling you a secret, which is how to win at sports gambling, or the joy of sports gambling. Whereas, of course, I think you all knew the only joy we were thinking of was the joy of on Tom Woodhouse's face every time he counts his money. Since that time, we've had inquiries from The Age, and it's interesting, both the great newspapers of this land, the Herald Sun and The Age, were interested by the thought that the museum might be allowing young children to learn about gambling. And they were quite happy to think about running a story attacking the museum because it was teaching young children about gambling. But as soon as we explained that it was a story about how to beware of the sports gambling industry and its spin, those two newspapers that accept advertising from the sports gambling industry decided not to run the story. So you're a lucky audience. We were hoping for 200, promoted by publicity from The Age and the Herald Sun, but they ran a mile. But one man did not run away. Senator Nick Xenophon. Now, I have a great admiration, have had a great admiration for Senator Nick Xenophon, and he wrote to Patrick Green, Dr. Patrick Green, the head of the museum, and asked the museum to cancel this lecture because it was evil, because it was going to be introducing gambling to young children. And the MAV sincerely thanks the museum and Dr. Green for their firm and prompt reply. Get nicked. In the politest possible way. However, the beauty of it is that a senator never lets go. And so the senator had a second attempt at convincing Patrick Green not to run this lecture. And in fact, he wrote to me arguing that I shouldn't be running this lecture. Now, I'm not going to editorialise. I'm going to read you a paragraph. I'm going to let you form your own opinions. The lecturer, Marty Ross, won't be. He'll actually be talking about the paragraph and why it's so bad later on. But I'll let you form your own view. And if you decide you're with Nick Xenophon, you are welcome to leave at the end of the paragraph. Whether intentional or not, you ought to be able to recognise this statement, which is Marty showing you about the odds, etc. Recognise this statement as encouragement to use mathematics, you bet your sweet pippy, to determine whether or not a bet will be successful. In essence, by purporting to teach individuals how to assess gambling odds using a, quote, because it's fiction, mathematical approach, you are in turn also encouraging people to gamble. And so with that read, please welcome the person who will be talking to you about sports gambling, Dr. Marty Ross.
Yeah, it's been an interesting week, month. And I do really thank the museum for their really strong support and pushback. They did write strongly, but most politely and respectfully to Senator Xenophon. Simon wrote most strongly, and I'll leave it at that, to Senator Xenophon, and I'll talk about that. So what is this lecture about? This lecture, it wasn't intended to be this way. There's always something a bit personal about this for me. This will be a bit more personal because the people who have attacked me, and attacked Burkhardt, who's simply here watching me stir people up, attacked Burkhardt as well. So what's this lecture about? This is the purpose of it.
That was the best, Mr. Rumson.
You think so, huh?
Without any doubt. Now, I like smoking and drinking very much, but they can't touch the last one. That's got everything.
Most people would go along with that. tell me there's not one drink whiskey in this whole house?
Here, Mr. Rumson, take mine.
Thank you, boy. You saved my life.
Thornton, how did that bottle get into your pocket?
Martin.
How long have you been drinking hard liquor?
Well, since this afternoon. I know you don't approve, Pa, but believe me, until you've had a good cigar and a shot of whiskey, you're missing the second and third best things in life.
Martin.
Where'd you take him, Ben?
Damn you, Ben Rumson. What are you going to teach this boy next? How to cheat at cards or just physical education with one of Willie's floozies?
That's the best one, Pa.
Okay, so we're only going to be talking about the fourth best. Okay, just to be clear, how many unaccompanied children are in the audience? Yeah, okay, all right. Sorry, Burkhard, our attempts to corrupt the youth of Australia has failed again. We're going to have to work harder next year. Okay, now, as Senator Xenophon, let's call him Senator X, keep him anonymous. He attacked us really for two reasons. One was that children would be in the audience and that we would be introducing gambling to children. And now, with all respect for the children here, we know that most of the children are hoping that there's some funny slides and it's kind of jokey, but they're really just waiting to get to the museum in general. And you know, they'll go up and they'll see Far Lap. Oh, whoops, no, it can't be Far Lap. No, sorry. You can't do that because Far Lap's like gambling. All right, so what's the real purpose of this talk? It's kind of obvious, but I think the history of this talk is worth talking about. And Simon Pryor alluded to it to somewhat. This whole series of public lectures with the MAV began in 2001. In 2001, I had the idea of giving some public talks, and then in just about 2001 I met Burkhard, and then in 2002 Burkhard came on board and introduced me to the modern technical age. But back in 2001, I had this talk called The Joy of Gambling. And I look back at that transparency and I think, oh my God, what was I thinking? There I was, associated with a place called Monash University. Can't believe it. All right, clearly technical things have improved a bit. Now, the thing about The Joy of Gambling, so that was again, you know, that was my first introduction to Simon. I think it was in 2002, and Simon, I gave this talk. And Simon was really nervous, and he really wanted the question mark at the end of The Joy of Gambling. And I kept getting rid of it. And we went back and forth. There's a lot of time. And Simon was genuinely nervous in the way that the museum, or not the museum, well, maybe the museum was nervous, and yeah, I can understand it. When we've talked to the press about this, or when the press kind of came to lynch us, the words we've been using is the title is ironic, and it is ironic, but it's probably a better word is cheeky or mischievous. It comes from, I mean, how did I come, you know, kind of a mathematician guy talk about gambling? And it's not, I'm not a professional gambler, just in case anybody doubts it. I have no ties to the gambling industry whatsoever. I take, you know, the occasional bet and things like that, but I'm just, you know, just a nerd who places a bet. It actually, this is sort of the personal part of it, is, this is my father, it was my father, he died in 2001. Incredibly bright man, he was ferociously intelligent, and ferocious is kind of the word. He was very, I mean, he you know, was proud of me, you know, his son getting a nice PhD and all that, but he always thought my intellect was a little wimpy, that I wasn't hard enough. Which some of you who know the way I am might be a bit surprised at. Apart from being incredibly intelligent, he was also a compulsive gambler. Seriously, not a terrible gambler. He didn't bet the house, but he would gamble. He would gamble on the horses. He would had systems for the horses, which of course never worked. And he'd steadily lose money. Not a lot of money, but you know, he's addicted to it. He was addicted to pokies. He would play pokies, and occasionally he'd have to go down to the you know, the local sports club or whatever and say, hey, it's time for dinner. And you'd wait 20 minutes while he waited for the jackpot or whatever it was to come, and it was quite remarkable. As I say, it wasn't a huge financial problem, but it was notable. It was notable that someone that bright, that incisive, could still be a compulsive gambler. And Burkhardt and I have written about poker machines, and we've got up one on super rigging of poker machines. And if people are, one of the things which surprises me, I mean, it's clear what everyone thinks of sports gambling, and I think there's a lot of things you can think about it. I'm really uncomfortable with it in certain ways as well. I do think it's kind of being normalized in a way which is very strange. I don't think there's any evidence that sports gambling initiates the kind of evil that poker machines do. I think there's just fundamentally evil. I also think they're illegal. I'm just amazed that the way they are, it seems clear to me that poker machines violate the Trade Practices Act for a deceptive product. I'm just amazed that that's not being pursued harder. Anyway, that's me. Now, what happened is in 1997, the Crown Casino opened. And as my father was retired, he was just kind of like a retired pensioner guy. He likes to gamble. He's American. And he, not that there's much, at least when we were in America, there wasn't a lot of gambling there, but he remembers fondly the trip to Las Vegas and things like that. So he was very happy when the casino opened, and but he didn't have a lot of money. We were okay. Kind of splintered family, but he was okay. And the thing about it was hard to tell us, but what happened was he learned to count cards, made about $100,000, and lived happily ever after. That's part of the story. It makes the kind of morality stories kind of weird. He was a gambler, but he gambled, when there was the opportunity to gamble intelligently, he did take it. Even when the opportunity wasn't there, he gambled unintelligently. And it was a weird mix. And then what happened, again, sorry, I will get to the equations and more clips and stuff, but what happened was, in order to socialize with him, I would go to the casino and count cards with him. So I led for a few years this kind of schizophrenic life, where I'd be lecturing things, I'd be lecturing calculus during the day, preparing my lectures, and then going off to count cards in this kind of weird, sleazy, Alice in Wonderland environment of peculiar logic. And it showed me, it certainly showed me how awful gambling is, and the kind of just twisted logic of gamblers. But it also showed me some puzzles of just, well, why do they lose? How do they lose? How does the mathematics work? And the mathematics is not always as easy as people think. And it really shone a light on me when one of my father's friends, a guy he used to gamble with at the casino, a very good gambler, this friend of my father's quit school when he was 16 in order to bet on horse races. And he won. He won because he would get up at 6 in the morning, time the horses himself, and so on. And there was a puzzle which came up in the casino, and my father's friend said, "What do you think about this? Isn't this a better way to use this offer?" And I said, "No, that can't be true." And he was right, and I was wrong. Right? So this is a guy who quit school when he was 16, basically knows no probability to save his life except for some instinct. But he got this mathematical question correct, and I got it wrong. And so it's kind of made me ponder the puzzles of this as well. So some of this is simply, it's trying to figure out the intelligence of gambling. What is the mathematics? What is the way to think about gambling? There is a mix of it, though. I mean, it is clear that gambling causes a hell of a lot of trouble for a lot of people. So kind of my mathematical curiosity, is neither here nor there when you're talking about the kind of troubles it causes. And it obviously causes huge troubles. As I say, I think poker machines are a much more obvious problem than sports gambling, but there's something weird about it all. Right? So it's not to promote gambling here, it's certainly not promoting it. That's my own experience of it is kind of weird and mixed, but it's not to promote it. But the thing thing about the title, now I could have put all sorts of titles. I could have put The Joy of Sports Gambling, ? Or what's the truth of sports gambling, things like that. But there's a reason for the kind of cheeky title. Now here's a study, International Gambling Studies. This study appeared earlier this year, and it was reported in the press from some Australian academics. And they surveyed people about why they gamble, how they gamble. And they came to the remarkable conclusion that there's a lot of gambling advertising around. Well, not every article should have, has E equals MC squared in it, that is fine. They also, they concluded that young men are more prone to gambling advertising than everybody else. And again, will knock me down with a feather. That's fine. It was quoted, and I get the sense that there was a media release. I couldn't find the media release, but the quotes in different newspapers were pretty much the same. So it felt like that kind of lazy journalism where it gets quoted, and no one, actually reads what they're writing. This is in either the interview or media release, whatever it is. One of the authors had this quote, and it was, "They, the gamblers, believe if they are more educated or knowledgeable about certain types of sports or about the technicalities of gambling, that they are more likely to win." And we know that that's just not true. And the absurdity of this statement, I just found mind-numbing. Now, one may still, think that gambling is a bad idea, but to suggest that not knowing about the sport or not knowing about the nature, the technicalities of gambling, the mathematics of gambling, doesn't help you is simply ridiculous. But this got widely quoted without without concern. Then, of course, as Simon was saying, we've been picked on various people, including Senator X. And Senator X wrote a rather quite amazing bullying letter to the museum, I guess, as Simon said, basically demanding that the lecture be, not demanding, but sort of threatening that the lecture be cancelled. That was clearly his wish. Simon wrote back very aggressively and just forever in his debt for just how strongly and how well he responded to Senator X. And Senator X doubled down in the bad gambling sense of the word on Friday. And as a politician who digs in his heels, we had a nice example of Tony Abbott this week, who just couldn't admit, that he used to be a thug. But, all right, here's what he wrote, and Simon read it, but he'll talk about it a bit. "Whether intentional or not, you ought to be able to recognize this as encouragement to use mathematics." Oh, God, well, what a horrible thing for me to do. To determine whether or not a bet will be successful. Now that's kind of clumsy language. All right, so you think he'd be a bit more careful given he's picking a fight. You don't determine whether a bet's successful. It's fundamentally different about the nature of probability and basically gambling mathematics. It's simply not the way thinking about gambling works. Okay. Then the second half of it is, in essence, by purporting to teach individuals to assess gambling odds using a mathematical approach, you're in turn also encouraging people to gamble. I'm not purporting. All right. I will talk to you about how to assess gambling odds. It's not purporting anything. A mathematical approach, why that's in quotes, I have no idea. I mean, it seems to be denying that there is some possibility of a mathematical approach. You are in turn also encouraging people to gamble. Well, there's some truth to it, of course. Not in essence, but in consequence. Any risky behavior, if you educate people about the risks, there is some sense in which you encourage them to take that risk, because it's less risky. That's the nature of it. But I thought we had long ago given up the idea that you just have your sermonizers telling you, no, that's bad, and we just say, oh yeah, okay, well, let's go on. That's just not the way any kind of concern for risky behavior works these days. And I certainly, Senator X's campaign against poker machines, I'm 200% for. I think it's just wonderful. But his kind of sermonizing here and his kind of ignorant sermonizing really makes me ponder the nature of it. And some of the people here suggested the right word for him is fool, and I've heard other words. There are children here, I don't want to corrupt the children, so I'll leave my own expression for him, but I just say that there is something very flat earthy about his whole approach to it. It's just ridiculous. Okay, now for the lecture, now that we've done what the lecture, why the lecture's about. Okay, all right, now to begin, all right, so gambling, so the journey of gambling, that talk was mostly about card counting, and generally about casino gambling and what people try to do to win or to lose. And we all know that casino gambling is a very classic.
Carte. 8 à la vente.
Suivi.
C'est suivi.
The house will have a difference.
Bien, madame. Oui, monsieur. Changeur, s'il vous plaît.
Card.
Carte. 9 à la banque.
I need another 1,000.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Okay, all right. Oh, you got the smoking, you got the cards. Later, you've got number one. I mean, it's really classy stuff. Of course, the casino gambling is nothing like that. But we're talking about sports gambling, which is not nearly like that. All right. So let's talk about it. So the finals are in full bore. Can I ask actually who's kind of like an AFL fan here? It's a funny crowd because I love football. When I grew up, I wanted to be a footballer, but I'm kind of talking to people who are actually interested in that. I like the football. Anyway, next week we've got the Hawks versus the Crows. Who should you bet on? It's funny. I mean, I talked to there's sort of different groups of people. There are people who have no sense of gambling at all, in the sense that they have no interest in it, no idea how you might think about what to bet on, which of course is fine because they never will. There are other people who have a sense of how to bet, but a very poor sense. And then there are people who have a much stronger sense. Well, the kind of fanhood thing to do is simply bet on who you want to win. If you're a Hawks fan, you bet, oh yeah, I want to be on those Hawks. I'll bet $100 on the Hawks or whatever. And that's certainly not the way you should bet in a mathematical sense. A much more common answer, this is a very common answer, is who you think will win. Which seems kind of natural, but is also incorrect. And the trouble is, it's simply a question of how much you get paid for it. So if the Hawks are $1.10, that means if you bet $100 on Hawthorne and they win, you win $10. Are you really willing to risk that amount in order to try to win $10? On the other hand, if the Crows are $10, so you bet $10 on the Crows to try and get back $100 to try to win $90, it may be worthwhile, even though you think Adelaide has very little chance against Hawthorne. Okay? So the answer is, it doesn't matter. The mathematical is, it doesn't matter. In the long run, you'll lose. Right? As long as the bookies' odds are correct. They don't talk about that. Okay? So it's certainly the first thing about it is gamblers do not bet on who they think will win. They bet on what they think is good value. Now, how they decide that, there's lots of questions. In fact, the current odds, it's sort of varying, but they're already up. I mean, about 10 seconds after the preliminary final ended, the odds for the next game were up. And Hawthorne's about $1.20 to win against Adelaide next week, and Adelaide's about $5 to win. And the idea is somehow that both should be equally attractive or unattractive. And that brings up the fundamental notion in gambling is expectation. And the thing about it is, again, I say, is the point of the title, it is ironic. It is, there's not that much joy in sports gambling. Well, but some people do. But it is a tweak of the nose of gambling studies people and gambling sermonizers who actually talk about the evils of gambling without actually talking about the mathematics of gambling. This is the mathematics which is often missing. Now, with those odds, suppose you bet $5 on Hawthorne and you bet $1.20 on Adelaide. So if Hawthorne wins, you get 5 times 1.2, you get $6. If Adelaide wins, you get 5 times 1.2, you get $6. So you've bet $6.20, and whoever wins, you get back $6. Boy, isn't gambling fun? All right. But that's exactly the way the odds work. Now you may secretly know that Lance Franklin is injured and isn't going to play, so that the odds are skewed in some manner. But if the odds are correct, it doesn't matter who you bet on, and the expectation in this case is 6 divided by 6.2 is 97%. So the expectation, it says that on average you bet over and over, lots of preliminary finals, a lot of AFL games. With these kind of odds, you'll get back 90%, 97% of what you bet. 100% would be fair odds. Anything below 100 means you're losing, at least on average in the long run. And so that's all. That's it. Okay. What about if things are more complicated? So if there's no St. Kilda guy there, unfortunately, but there's 4 teams left in the AFL. And how do you figure out expectation there? Well, who was the original Avenger chick? No. This one.
Tell me, do you know this one? When would a punter definitely win by backing every horse in the race?
Well, say there were 10 horses. You add 1 to the odds of each of those 10 horses. Then you take the reciprocal of those 10 numbers. So that the sum of the reciprocals is less than 1. You must win.
You're very talented, Mrs. Gale.
And she is. She got it right. So there's a different way of talking about the odds. So there was an add 1 thing. But here are the current odds on one of the betting sites for who's going to win the premiership. So Hawthorn's $1.60, very strong favorite. Adelaide Crows is $11. Good luck. And so what she's saying is you take the sum of the reciprocals. So 1 over 1.6 plus 1 over 4.5 plus 1 over 5.75 plus 1 over 11. And that's 1.13. If that's less than 1, then the odds are in your favor overall. The expectation is positive. It's greater than 1, so we lose out. You take the reciprocal of that, the expectation is 90%. So that you can find out the expectation of any market. So you can have, if you've got 18 horses in a race, then you can use this to calculate, on average, how much is the bookie taking from you? To what extent is it unfair? And it varies a lot from bet to bet. Well, it's not over 100, you can bet that, but it's in the game Adelaide versus Hawthorn, the expectation was 97%. It wasn't much of a loss. Here, the expectation is 90%, and I think they'd be quite bad. Now, what can you do about this? Well, gamblers have been trying to do things about this forever. Of course, there have always been bad bets, and there have always been people trying to turn them into good bets. And the standard thing, much more casino thing, but still applies everywhere, is what are called bet variation schemes. And the very simplest one is what's called martingale. Lots of people come up with this. The idea is if you bet $1, if you win, say bet $1 on red or black on roulette. And forget about the 0 for now. You bet $1, if you win, great, you bet another $1. If you win again, oh, another child. Okay, thanks. Here's another one. If you bet another $1, you win. If you lose, you bet $2. If you lose, you bet $4. If you lose, you bet $8. And what happens is, as soon as you win, that whole combination of lose, 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 win, wins you $1. And you start again. So you just keep winning $1 over and over again. And in this case, if you'd been betting black on roulette for that sequence, you would have won $5, and betting red $2. There's the D'Alembert system, which is rather than doubling your bet each time you lose, you go up by 1. And you go down by 1 each time you lose. There's the reverse Labouchere. And these systems have much better chance of succeeding if they have fancy French names. And this one is too complicated to even bother itemizing what's going on with it. It's very strange system. Works out to have done that in this. There's a book called 13 Against the Bank which goes into this. I actually looked up, I figured, who's Labouchere? Anyway, so I looked him up. Henry Labouchere, he actually was English. And he was the kind of English upper class twit that gives the English upper class such a fine name. He cheated at exams, he came up with gambling schemes, he was a diplomat, he was one of the most undiplomatic diplomats of all time, and didn't last long, and just generally, did lousy whatever he did. But he did enough things badly that there's actually a biography of him. But the fundamental theorem of gambling, this is the heart of gambling, which in some sense everybody knows, but gamblers forget. If the expectation is less than 100% for each bet, then there's no tricks of how you choose your bets or make your bets which will make the expectation 100% overall. It simply cannot be done. Okay? So, if you're betting on Hawthorne versus Adelaide, unless you've got some other tweak to it, if there's something else to add to it, you're going to lose in the long run. And actually, in the biography of Henry Labouchere, he talks about I'm not sure if it was that scheme, the original Labouchere scheme or something else, but he says, I theoretically discovered systems by which I was likely to win. Yet, in practice, and that's of course, the business of gambling. It's like perpetual motion machines. Boy, it really went a long time that time. Maybe I'll get it to go forever next time. And that's kind of bizarre hoping for the impossible behind a lot of what people do to gamble. Of course, if you haven't read it, of course, the book, the novel on it is The Gambler by Dostoevsky, which is just a phenomenal book on the horribleness and the perverseness of gambling, the intellectual perverseness of gambling. Just amazing book. I mean, anything by Dostoevsky, but The Gambler is just a great in the sense of being just a tragic story. So what can you do? Well, the obvious thing is you can give up. And if you're looking to make money, then that's probably a pretty good thing to do. Now, there are other things you can do. I mean, there's some guys down in Tasmania who seem to have done remarkably well. The tax office wants about $1 zillion from them because they earned about $10 zillion. So, know your horseflesh. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. Or know your maths, and I'll talk a bit about what these things can do. None of it is a magic cure, but it tells you what people try to do to figure this. Now, okay, now this is all right. This is not a Group 1 event we're talking about here. Okay, so there's the odds on Burkhart's Bungler, Simon Slug, Marty's Muddler, and Nick's Nag. And you work out the expectation of that is 80%. All right. Now, but actually, there's another horse in the race. It's actually got black caviar in there at the odds of $12. Does that make the expectation better or worse? Worse. That's the thing about it, is that it's adding, you add another 1 on 12 into the thing, it's making the total larger. It's making that's the difference between the expectation of a market, of the overall value of the bets combined, with the fact that you think, oh, I have a feeling that black caviar's got a pretty good chance of beating that U-shaped horse on the right. And $12 are probably pretty good odds. That's the business of knowing horseflesh. Okay? And that's not what I'm going to talk about. There's a lot of work people do to it. As I said, my father's friend, I guess gambling colleague, he quit school to do exactly this, to do his own timing. And he doesn't do it anymore, but he worked really hard. It was really, really hard work. And because you're coming over a large expectation, and that tends to be part of the problem. One of the things you can try to do is you can try to specialize. Okay, so there's all sorts of crazy bets you can bet on. I mean, you can bet on who's going to kick the first goal, in which case knowing some Hollywood players is really helpful, because they can tell you when the fullback's actually going to be playing full forward, and that can really be odds. Or here's one, this is just one of others. So, most disposals. Who's going to get the most kicks? And this is from last night's game. So, Beams has odds of $5. Dane Swan, he gets about 300 kicks a game, is $2, and so on, down through the odds. And you've got things like champion data, which people can use to kind of pick their fantasy football team, but they can also be used to try and get a sense of what these guys are doing, who they're playing against, who are the taggers, blah, 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 blah. The fundamental trouble with this is the expectation on that market there is 75%. The crazier, the kind of more, the weirder and more precise the market in some sense of first goal kicker or that kind of thing, the expectations tend to be much worse, which means you need to know much, much more about the horseflesh in order to overcome the fact that you're being ripped off. Okay, that's the nature. Okay. And just about this is just a still I was going to put it, I couldn't stand the noise. This is Azarenka and Sharapova in the Australian Open. And one of the funniest requests I've ever got from the media was during when the Australian Open final, and Azarenka and Sharapova are the two noisiest winning players in tennis. And a reporter from the Herald Sun asked me to come up with an estimate of how many grunts there would be in the match. And normally what you're supposed to do in this case is just come up with a guess. Tell them you use the fundamental theorem of calculus and complex algebra and leave it at that. All right. I actually tried to work it out. And so I actually, I was trying to figure, well, how long do the rallies last? How many go to deuce? And I tried to look up all this kind of sports statistics. And I trolled through all sorts of crazy sports journals looking for this information. And I came up with a reasonably reliable guess of how many grunts per set. Basically, how many rallies per set. And, how many hits per set. But one thing I found in that is a lot of the sports journal articles, not the majority by any means, but a lot of them seem to have the flavor of, they seem to have some kind of sports gambling, well, sort of application certainly, but also I felt that in their mind, or they were talking about the kind of the biomechanics or the statistics or something, there seemed to be something in it implicit that it was directed towards sports gambling. I have a feeling that there's a lot of research done out there, specifically designed, whether it's in journals or not, is specifically aimed at figuring out these kind of weird bets. And certainly, there's lots of professional gamblers who are doing exactly this. But again, it's hard. Okay, now, what about, so that's the horseflesh. And I'm not really going to talk about horseflesh anymore, but it's obviously relevant. What about using maths? Well, already, just doing expectation is doing a lot of maths. And lots of naive punters do not do it. They simply don't think about the expectation. They just think, oh yeah, I think Travis Cloak's going to kick a lot of goals, so I'll go for him the first goal kicker, even though the expectation on the market is lousy. Okay. Anyway, how can you use maths? Here's an example.
As I was saying, I make my mind go blank for a number pops into it.
A blank number?
A blank number. No, any number. Then I multiply the number by the same number, and the last number of the result is the horse I plunk it on. Simple, isn't it?
Simple. Listen, Professor, I happen your keen mathematical mind, so let's get on to cases. How do you intend to bid this next race?
Oh, I never bother with those things. Let me see. Number 6. 6 times 6 is 37. Number 7 is off, boss.
6 times 6 is 36.
Are you sure?
It has been for the last few years.
Well, I guess it's number 6 we bet on, although number 7 feels better to me. And I don't like to go against me mathematics.
Around the far turn, coming, Rainbow by ahead in War Ace. War Ace is driving hard, and it's War Ace and Rainbow. War Ace is in front by a length. War Ace wins by a length and a half.
War Ace, my number's 7. I told you I had a feeling. After this, I'm going to use my own system. What do you know about mathematics anyway? Gee, Courtney, you know how much me and Mr. Brennan won on the last race?
How much?
$600 a piece. That's what happens when nobody interferes with me mathematics.
Your Higgins, you're marvelous. Where did you go to school?
PS 14 on 28th Street, but the system's me own idea.
Yes, sir. 8 times 8 is 68.
Have you heard that 6 times 6 is 37?
No.
All right. Well, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the math that gamblers use is at that level. One of the things, is probably one of the main things, is what's called arbitrage. And used in all sorts of ways. But so here we're talking again about who's going to, you know, what are the odds, what are the offers on the teams winning the premiership. But you can look at various betting sites and get different odds. So I just took 4 betting sites there. And those are the various odds. So $1.60 is the best you can get on Hawthorne. You can actually get $5 on Swans, $6.50 on the Pies. Everybody thinks the Crows pretty much suck. $11. And that's got nothing to do with thinking of that because it's South Australian. It fits. Okay, so what you can do is you can pick the best bets for each team, depending upon the site. Well, if you do that on those 4 sites, you end up with expectation 93%. So it's still not enough. And so what you hope to do is look at enough sites on a tight enough, on a close enough market where there's enough people betting that you can actually get the expectation of 100%. And these do occur, and a lot of what professional syndicates are doing is looking for arbitrage over 100%. And it may be like 101% or 100.05%, and they're betting thousands and thousands of dollars. So that's the point, is they get this tiny, tiny edge, and then they bet a fortune on it. Which has 2 effects. One is, well, two consequences. One is it's very hard to mimic at home unless you mortgage the house, and that's not a good idea. Secondly, it means that odds tend to even up. If there's too much discrepancy in the odds, then the betting sites, you know, all of a sudden someone's betting, you know, $100,000 on Collingwood, they say, oops, better not make that $6.50 anymore, and then they'll change their odds. Okay, so it doesn't, these things don't last. They do exist, but it's hard to mimic. Okay, but there are other things, so who should you bet on? So this is an offer which has been on the TV all the time. If your team loses by 12 points or less, you get your money back. Now that can't hurt, whatever the expectation is. Okay? So the question is, what's the chances the team's going to lose by less than 12 points? By 12 points or less. Now, Hawthorne's got about a 20% chance of losing, and the Crows got an 80% chance of losing. Again, this is assuming that the bookies know what they're doing, that the odds are correct. No, not quite 20 and 80, it doesn't matter for the example. What about the chances of losing by 1 to 12? Well, again, there are bets, and there's bets on everything. I mean, you can bet on which toenail of Lance Franklin's going to be ingrown first. I mean, it's just, it's phenomenal what you can bet on, but you can get estimates for all these things from the bookies themselves. And the odds are it's about 12% chance for the Crows and about an 8% chance for Hawthorne. Which means that the expectation is about 105% for Hawthorne and 109% for the Crows. So that is actually a positive expectation on that bet. Okay? That offer gives you an edge. Now, you're only allowed to bet so much on it. You bet on the Crows, chances are you're simply going to lose. But the expectation in the long run for such offers is actually positive. All right, so what do these professional guys in Tasmania do? They do a combination of these things. They do arbitrage, they do offers, they do the fact that they're such big bettors that they can get much better offers than any of us can get, and so on. But it's exactly looking for special circumstances which help you. Now, okay, another one, this is one of the betting sites, has been plastering the screen with this lady in a cocktail dress with various sports equipment. Encouraging you to bet. 20% winner's bonus on the AFL finals. 20% sounds pretty good. We already had 97%, so maybe that's like 117% or something. No. All right. It's only on this disposals market, which is 75%. And you get a 20% bonus on that. Now, it's not exactly 75 plus 25, but it's pretty close to that. So that the bonus still makes it not worthwhile. It's not a positive. It's not an expectation over 100. even with this 20%. That's one of the things about these offers. There's these percentages all the time, but what they're percentages of can be extraordinarily difficult to figure out. All right. Here's a semi-dud offer. I'll explain why it's a semi-dud. 25% multi-bonus on the NFL. Okay, so you can bet on the NFL. Now, we're all experts on the American gridiron here, of course. We know exactly what we're betting on. We know our horseflesh. Now, the odds on the NFL, you bet on San Francisco 49ers or whatever to win, is about 96% on this side. Okay. But it's a multi-bonus, and people have very little understanding about multiplication. Not just because of calculators, just because multiplication, it multiplies much more than people think. All right. So a 4-leg multi, which means you have to bet on 4 different games. And you win if all 4 games win. Now, of course, you win proportionally larger amount. Okay? But the expectation is 96% multiplied by itself 4 times is about 85%. So even though the basic market is 96%, you get 80. Your market on betting on 4 teams at a time, 4 games at a time, is about 85%. Well, still 85% plus 25, roughly, that's 110. That still looks, oh, maybe that's worthwhile. Well, no, there's a problem. All right, first problem is the 25% bonus is only on the amount you win, not the amount of money you get back. Okay? Now let's just take this example I've got here where you bet on those teams. So the multiplied, the odds you would get on these 4 teams winning was the Texans, the Steelers, the Falcons, and who else have I got there? The Panthers, I think, is $6.11. Your winnings would be $5.11, and you get 25% of that. Okay. Oh, that's 103%. Well, still, bigger than 100. But there's another problem. The bonus you get is not cash, it's a free bet. Now, that in itself is not necessarily a problem. If you're gambling, then you're probably interested enough to use the free bet. But the question is, how much is a free bet worth? And there are offers for these free bets all along. Almost all of the betting sites, I think, offer you a free bet for signing up. It's actually illegal in Victoria, and one of the gambling sites got in trouble for offering the free bet, even though they weren't allowed to. And they could have gone to jail. I think it was a close-run thing whether or not they're going to go to jail. Now, that's kind of an odd thing. It's inducing people to gamble in some sense. It's certainly inducing them to sign up to their website, but it's inducing them by something which is actually free. It's not the same as kind of tricking them into getting something which is actually not worth anything. And again, I have mixed feelings about all this. But these free bets come up all the time. Okay? So let's suppose we've got a $100 free bet. Now, the trouble with a free bet is it only returns you the winnings. Okay? So if you bet on Hawthorn to win the premiership at $1.60, so you bet $100 on Hawthorn and they win, you would get $160 back. But if you bet a $100 free bet on it, you'd only get $60 back. The bet itself does not automatically turn into money you get back. And that actually changes everything. And I'll give you an example. It's easier to think about this in terms of roulette, where we actually know the probabilities of things. So roulette, you got 37 numbers, 18 red, 18 black, and the green. So let's suppose we've got 2 of these free bets, and you place 1 on red and 1 on black. Let's forget about 0. 0 never comes up. Whatever happens, we get back $100. Right? Red comes up, you get back $100. Black comes up, gets up, you get back $100. The free bets have disappeared. Okay? So, what's that mean? Each bet is worth $50. All right, now, if you want to count in the fact that there's a 0 there, so 1 in every 37 times, you just use both free bets, it's about $48.60. Okay, so a free bet seems to be worth a lot less than $100. Now, this is where my father's colleague told me that's not right. And I said, don't be ridiculous, of course it's right. And he was right, and I was wrong. All right, so Let's do it again. Take 37 bets and place 1 on each number of the 37 numbers. Whatever happens, we get back $3,500. So each bet is worth $3,500 divided by 37 is $94.59. Which is a rather weird thing about the free bet. This is one of the things which sort of not entice me to gamble, but entice me to look carefully at gambling offers and what they do and what they don't do, is that the value of a free bet depends upon what you do with it. That it's much more valuable on things, on bets which are likely to lose. Right? That's the weird thing, is what you want a free bet to do is in some sense lose. Okay, so if you look at the AFL Premiership thing, there are the odds. And you think of putting a $100 free bet, what's it worth? Well, if you bet on the Hawks, the free bet's worth about $34 because Hawthorn is such a short team. Sufficiently corrupted, I guess. Okay. $70, $74, and you can bet on Adelaide, the free bet corresponds to being worth $81. Okay? Less than $100, but in some sense, the longer the shot, you know, the crazier the thing, the bet, the more it's worth. Okay. Okay, so back to our multis. How much is this actually worth? So, well, what you have to do is multiply by that. You know, what are you doing with the free bet? And say something like 0.8 or something like that. And there you come up with 99%. So, this offer of a 25% bonus on a 96% market turns out to not be worth, you know, still not worth doing. Now, there's things you can do about that. It's a semi-dud offer because you can actually bet the free bet so that it's worth more. Also, the 25% counts more if you bet on longer shot teams as well. If you're betting, if the combined bet is $20 rather than $6, then it's worth more and you can get a small edge. But it's at best a very marginal offer, and only if you're betting on extreme outcomes. So it all kind of, you know, it's just, you know, for me it's just a puzzle. I don't know what it is for people who try to do this. What if you really want to bet on Hawthorn? All right, you got your $100 free bet. You don't say, look, Hawthorn's going to win. I want to bet on Hawthorn. Horse flesh, right? That's the kind of thing. You just think, you know, that Hawthorn is the thing you want to bet on. As I said, you can bet on anything on these betting sites. And one of the things you can bet on is the flip of a coin. Why on earth you would bet on the flip of a coin, I have no idea. But you can. You can bet on, like in a cricket game, you can bet on who's going to win the toss. Don't blame me, I just work here. Right? I mean, what can you say about such bets? Right? Now, of course, you know, the fair odds on the flip of a coin is $2. All right, so you get $2 back. You know, bet $1, you get $2 back if you're picked right, and $0 if you lose. And of course, they don't give you that. It's about $1.95. You don't lose a lot, but why on earth you think you would, you know, that there's any benefit in that is very strange. Well, it turns out there is a benefit to that. And again, this is one of the weird things. What if you bet on Hawthorn winning and the coin coming up heads, or Hawthorn winning and Hawthorn winning the toss? That's at odds of $3.12, combined odds, and the same for Hawthorn and tails. So you take two of these bets. If you do that, the value of the free bet is then worth about $60, rather than $34. So there is actually, in a weird way, if you're really going to do that, there's an advantage to betting on the flip of the coin. Very strange. Okay. It also works for the Crows bet, but less dramatically. So I think if you bet on the Crows in this way, it goes up to the free bet's worth about $84. Okay. Again, nothing's going to get us rich this way. It's just puzzling over the way these offers work. Just trying to make sense of what these things mean. Here's a Cyril puzzle. Cyril Rioli, sort of everybody's favorite player, one of their favorite player. Well, unless next week you're better for Adelaide, but just an amazing player. An offer, you get $4 if he scores 3 goals in the match. Is that a good offer? Bad offer? How on earth can you think about it? Well, he scored 37 goals in 21 games. So that's 1.75 about 1 3/4 goals per game. Well, that can help a lot. What are the chances? Okay. Let's do a different one. Let's look at Archie Thompson. Let's say Archie has scored 5 goals in his last 10 games. I made this up, but let's say he has. Okay. What are the chances Archie will score in his next game? Now, if it's for Australia, the chances are 0. We know that from some recent games, but let's ignore that. All right. So what are the chances? Any guess? Half. That's a very reasonable guess. Okay, let's look at Van Persie. Robbie has scored 10 goals in his last 10 games. What are the chances that Robbie will score in his next game? 1? Something's gone very wrong. Right. That's the thing. Clearly you want the average number of goals he scores is very relevant to how likely he is to score the next time or how many goals he is. But it's simply not a matter of his chances of scoring a goal, whether soccer or whatever, is not simply the average number of goals. And then we've got what's called the Poisson distribution. Little joke on you, Professor Fish, but Poisson is, he was a mathematician about 200 years ago. And this is beautiful mathematics. This is harder maths, but it used to be in the year 12 curriculum. It was terrific maths. It was such beautiful, it's such an important notion of this. Not for gambling, it is for that, but for all kinds of processes where things happen at an average rate, but erratically. And trying to figure out the probability that things will happen in a certain time period. Incredibly important distribution. Not just that, but it ties together all sorts of mathematics within the high school curriculum. It ties in the exponential function, factorials, just wonderful mathematics, and of course it's been taken out long ago. And is not in the new national curriculum. Okay, and what the Poisson says, we won't go into it, but it says that Archie's chances of kicking a goal, it's got to be less than a half. And the trouble is, of course, that the average comes not just from kicking, 1 goal every 2 games, but sometimes he might kick 2 goals or 3 goals. All right, and Robbie, it's about 63%. Now that can change, of course, right? I mean, if in fact Australia is playing Tahiti next, then Archie's chances are probably about 95%. But again, this is the first take into what's going on. So if you go back to Cyril, turns out he's got about a 26% chance according to these odds. Now, it depends who he's playing, whether he's in form, things like that, horseflesh. But, on a first guess, he's about, he's got a 1 in 4 chance of kicking his 3 goals. You get $4 for it, which means it's kind of a fair bet, slightly in your favor. But it's no great offer. But that's the kind of thing you need to do. The Poisson distribution comes up with a lot of these offers, a lot of these bets, and is pretty much universally not known certainly by non-professional gamblers. Okay. Do we want to do this? No, we won't do that. I'll skip to get that one. I'll do this last one. Okay, here's a very strange offer. This is the last offer I'll talk about. 4 bites of the sherry, pun on, very bad pun on sherry football, but these guys write these things very quickly. All right, first goal scorer. So you've got to bet on the first goal scorer. Now the first goal scorer who's going to kick the first goal is largely a crapshoot. Of course, Lance Franklin's got a much better chance than the guy sitting on the bench. But the overall expectation is about 80%. All right. But in this offer, if your guy doesn't kick the first goal, and he kicks the first goal of the second quarter, or the third quarter, or the fourth quarter, you also get paid off. Is that a good offer or a bad offer? It's a remarkably good offer. It's not quite 4 times 80, because if he kicks the first goal twice, you don't get paid twice. But it's just a ridiculously good offer. And I have no idea why they offered it. It wasn't like it was a great fanfare for it. It was just simply kind of appeared. Huh. Checked it 5 times. You're still likely to lose, of course. You've got 4 shots of getting the first goal score. What are the odds of anybody getting the first goal? Well, it's maybe like 1 in 10, even for something like someone like Lance Franklin. So you don't have a, you know, chances are, whatever you bet, you're likely to lose. You only get one bet on these kind of offers. But the expectation is just huge. Very rare. Mostly these offers either basically, you know, are just even. The expectation on the Brownlow metal market, by the way, is about 70%. As I say, the larger the market, the more options, the more they rip you off. Okay, so let's suppose you bet $100 on Gary Apple, and he ties. Then instead of getting $400 back, you get $200 back. That's the normal rule. So if there's a tie between two people, you get half of what you would have gotten back. What about the tie on $100 free bet? Well, maybe you get $150 back. You'd normally win $300, but you only get half your winning, so you get $150. Or maybe you get $100. That's $200, so that's half of the normal $300 win, and that's $200, but then you subtract the $100 because it's a free bet. Well, not surprisingly, that's the one the bookies go for. Okay? And this happened with a bet of mine, and I queried it, and I talked about it, and then I came up with this example. Let's suppose you bet on black caviar at $1.10, and you dead heats, you'll get $55. But if it's a free bet, $55 minus $100, you actually end up owing them $45. And I pointed out this example 10 times to them, not because I cared about, I think it was $3 I was quibbling over, but I just wanted to see what their logic was like. And the answer was it was non-existent. They simply couldn't acknowledge their rules were their rules. So if you followed their rules, that's what happened. But they simply refused to acknowledge that there was anything wrong with their rules. They just said, oh, well, in that case, we wouldn't charge you, which is, you know, very sporting of them. But that's, again, it's a bizarre thing. The only thing about it is sports gambling. It has kind of invaded us. It has been normalized. But the only thing is to kind of think clearly about it and, you know, think more clearly than betting sites at times. Thanks very much.
Are there any questions before we go? In that case,
Yep.
just...
Yep.
Marty, just to give sympathy for the senator.
Yep.
Obviously, your title, you know, misled him a little.
Yes, sure.
Shouldn't have persisted after that. The thing is, the researcher you quoted, Samantha Thomas, you'd be pleased to hear she's from Monash.
Yes, I know.
And,
I figured I'd one Monash joke per lecture is all I'm allowed.
You know, the state government recently released the second version of its gambling materials for schools.
Yep.
And it's put out under, you know, the people who run gambling, the Justice Department and the
Yep.
Department of Consumer Affairs, rather than being put out by education. Not that education would have done a better job, but the material it introduces types of horse betting, and it's mathematically wrong. So this is the sort of things that the Senator Xenophon is up against, and leads him to be worried when people start talking about educating about gambling, because there's such a lot of bad education going on. And that's what led the Productivity Commission a couple of years ago to recommend that there be no further maths education in schools about gambling until the terrible stuff that's been done was better evaluated.
Yep.
So I understand why he was initially concerned about what you might. He doesn't realise what marvellous talks you give and how profound and illuminating they are about what's.
I wouldn't say profound, it was just arithmetic, yes. Thank you. Well, let me respond briefly. One is I don't know about the materials, but if you can send me the link or email me about it, I'd love to hear about it anytime people goof mathematics. Look, there is a sense, there's no question, that anytime you talk about gambling, you're normalizing it. That's the word people use, and I think there's truth to it. And whenever I gave the card counting talk, I said, well, all this is doing is encouraging people to think they can count cards. In fact, card counting is easy, but most people do it badly, and they lose money because they think they're counting correctly. And the same thing can happen here. I agree with it. As for Senator X, look, yes, it's a cheeky title. I can understand that people could be misled by the title. I understand even if they're not misled by the title, they're thinking it shouldn't be making fun of something which is more serious than that. However, what is not forgivable is to make a threatening letter to the museum on the basis of no information. If you inquire about it first, before sending an aggressive letter, fair enough, he did not. Secondly, his second letter, doubling down on this, really doubling down in the sense that a gambler doubles down on a bad bet, his second letter is quite ridiculous. Really ridiculous. Now again, I have a lot of sympathy for Senator Xenophon. I have in the past. I think pokies are absolutely evil. And his campaign against them, I support wholeheartedly. But the kind of thuggish sanctimoniousness and ignorant sanctimoniousness of his letters and his approach to here certainly makes me question more carefully what's going on.
I hope to see you all next month. We'll be talking about, I think it's Hollywood, isn't it?
Yes, much later. Maths in the movies per card.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Crawl under.